Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a single, really fast-paced Sky News Australia commentary segment. We're going to unpack three completely different stories to see how they're framed and see if we can find a common thread that links them all together. Right off the bat, the segment we're analyzing opens with this really strong statement. It immediately sets a confrontational tone. You see this a lot, right? It's a classic way to frame a story as a political win for one side and a defeat for the other, right from the get-go. So that's a pretty big claim to open with. It makes you wonder, what exactly is this bubble they're talking about? And what's the bombshell that supposedly bursted? This segment asks this to hook you in and set up its first big topic. Okay, so the first story they tackle is a big one. Newly released files about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this has obviously been a huge topic in the media, and the commentators here are positioning their information as a major new development. So, how do they build this case? Well, it all seems to hinge on a specific FBI document. The main claim, which they attribute to a former police chief, is that Trump himself was actually the whistleblower who called the police to report Epstein. These specific points you see here, they form the absolute foundation for their entire analysis. And this is where the framing gets really interesting. This claim isn't just presented as a piece of news. Nope, it's set up as this big battle between two totally different narratives. On one side, they call it a huge win for Trump. And on the other, they say it counters what they describe as a Democrat and media obsession with trying to link the two. And that whole setup leads to this key prediction from one of the commentators. They speculate that what they call the mainstream media is going to deliberately bury this story. It's a classic move, you know? It frames their own show as the only place you're getting the real story that other people are supposedly trying to hide. Okay, now get ready for a hard pivot. After challenging that national political narrative, this segment just completely shifts gears. It moves on to its second story, and the focus changes from media framing to alleged government fraud in the state of California. And to kick off this second story, they drop a massive number on you, $8.6 billion. A number that big is designed to do one thing: grab your attention immediately and show you the incredible scale of the problem they're about to dive into. Let's look at how they build this argument. It's a pretty interesting technique. They start super specific with one vivid example, a single address in San Diego. Then they zoom way out to the massive official response from the Small Business Administration, which ended up suspending over 100,000 borrowers. And then one of the commentators takes this specific allegation about financial fraud and uses it to make a much, much broader personal conclusion. They even use a personal story about being told not to wear an American flag mask to back up this huge, sweeping statement about the state's entire pandemic response. All right, time for another big shift. For the final story, we're leaving the U.S. entirely and heading to Australia. The focus changes again, this time to a controversial protest chant that happened during a visit from Israel's president. So here's the scene they're setting for us. You've got a high-profile visit, a protest that involves a really well-known activist, and this tense situation where people attending an event were apparently locked inside for their own safety. Now, the segment's entire analysis really zooms in on this one specific chant, which they attribute to the protester. Now, the original source has a slight typo, but the phrase they're focused on is Globalize the Intifada. And that phrase becomes the absolute center of their critique. And this right here is the absolute core of their argument. The commentators don't really debate what the chant could mean. Instead, they give it a very specific, very stark definition. They frame the phrase not just as a protest slogan, but as a direct call to wipe out a country. So, what's the response? Well, one commentator offers this direct, three-step piece of advice to the protester. It kind of works as both a criticism of the protester's actions and as their proposed solution, framing the whole issue as one of needing more education and personal experience. Okay, so we've just walked through three totally different stories: U.S. politics, California finance, and Australian protest. So what's the deal? Is there a common thread that actually ties all of this together? Let's synthesize what we've seen. You know, when you lay it all out like this, a pretty clear pattern starts to emerge, doesn't it? In every single case, the commentators are presenting a perspective that directly challenges what they see as an established narrative or an official story.
Every single story is framed as them revealing some kind of hidden or suppressed truth.
So, here's the key takeaway. This segment isn't really just reporting 3 separate news items. It's actually weaving them all into one larger story, a story about challenging what they portray as the dominant and often misleading public conversation. And all of this leaves us with a really important question to think about. For any media we consume, how much does the frame they put around a story change how we actually see it? Is the way we're told something just as powerful, maybe even more powerful, than the information itself? Definitely something to keep in mind.